Okay. Well,
Okay,
welcome. Thank you
awesome.
for doing this. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Well, it's good to have you here on a Friday with us. I just got back in out of town. I was actually in North Carolina yesterday, so I just got in last night. But anyway, first of all, thank you for, as I said, thank you for doing this. I want to know just, can you tell us a little bit about your background? I know I was reading a little bit about that. You've been in the food recipe, nutrition space for quite a while, and you kind of become more of a proponent of meat, but can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so for most of my adult life, I've been a food blogger and recipe developer. I now consider myself a meat evangelist and carnivore, and I'm the creator of the Road to Carnivore podcast. My carnivore journey, I never expected I'd be doing this. It really started in a place of desperation. I was having really severe digestive bleeding that I could not resolve. My only remaining option was surgery. And I really didn't want to do that because I was nursing my baby and the anesthesia from the surgery would have required me to wean. And I came across a video on carnivore and I thought it seemed completely nuts. I had bought into the plant-based health narrative. Most of what I was eating was salads and vegetables and things. And I had seen even over the 11 years that I was in the food and recipe industry that it had really shifted to plant-based. But it also sort of made sense and I had nothing to lose. So I went carnivore and within 3 days, my bleeding was gone along with my chronic acid reflux and constipation and a slew of other things that I, had a really long history seeing doctors and colonoscopy and endoscopy and all sorts of medications. And I was told is unfixable. So I was like, well, this is fascinating. 2 weeks in, I fell off the wagon, not on purpose, but I went to a birthday party and had some cake and things, and the bleeding started immediately. And I decided that day I am going to double down. I'm going to do this for at least a few months. And I had done for 4 years at that point, things like keto and low carb, paleo, Atkins, Whole30, and carnivore was completely different. And it's interesting because people tend to group these diets together, right? But for me, it was just a completely different experience. Not only were all my digestive issues completely gone, but I had really stable energy and clear skin, and random seeming things like gum bleeding stopped and tonsil stones are gone. And I have a list of like 30 things in my journal that I actually like to go back and look at from time to time. And so at that point, I realized it wasn't just a temporary experiment. It was something that was here to stay in my life. And I had to figure out how to shift my livelihood and my whole life around that. And it was not only my job to develop delicious things, but it was also my answer to stress relief and boredom and entertainment and showing myself love, showing other people love. And so I'm really passionate, as you might imagine, about helping people through the emotional and mental hurdles, because I absolutely had really strong attachments to food. I think a lot of people do. So yeah, it's a little bit about my story and how I ended up here. Oh, I think you're muted. Okay, good.
Yeah, I'm muted. Yeah, I am. Yeah, it's just amazing. You think about it, you go through years of doctors telling you nothing you can do, live with it, you kind of learn to live. And then 3 days later, it's like, wow.
3 days.
I see that.
It's mind blowing.
Yeah. And I see that not infrequently. And I think it's, just because we have this sort of, I guess, single-mindedness that meat is bad for us and therefore we must get rid of it, and on and on and on. And, obviously I think the bravery of the people that are willing to do this, and there's so many people in this community who said, look, I'm just going to try it. And guess what we find? That what we've been told doesn't seem to be necessarily accurate. So prior to this, doing all the plant-based, food-based stuff, I mean, when you made that shift, I mean, how did you, I mean, now when you do this stuff publicly, are you more, I mean, I guess you're sharing your story. Obviously, you're here. So, I mean, are you finding it difficult to connect with people now, or is it still you still have the same audience?
It's interesting because when I figured out, oh no, this is permanent to stay in my life, what do I do about my career that I've built over the past 11 years? I was really scared at first. because I think most people think that vegetables are the healthiest things that we can eat, and that meat is horrible, not only for your body, but for the environment. And there's a lot of social issues surrounding that stuff too. And I mean, even while we're on the topic of the environment, I spent 3 months really researching, reading books, having actual conversations with PhDs who've worked in environmental research for their whole careers, for my own integrity, just to figure out, is this narrative accurate? And I actually have an episode on my podcast looking at every single one of the criticisms of meat and why they're completely inaccurate. And I think that even something like when you're talking just a moment ago about my shift, part of me going and creating the podcast, it's a little bit different from your usual podcast in that there are these highly researched 15-minute monologues looking at different angles of health and why carnivore specifically is so incredible for metabolic health, nutrition, gut health, all these different angles, and trying to, like, there's information for seasoned carnivores, but a lot of it is welcoming skepticism, because that's where I started from. And I think I've lost sight of the original question because I sort of get on a roll. But I personally have been honestly upset by the narrative in food, because I feel like it's very misguided. It doesn't feel full picture to me at all. I'm not bothered by people choosing to eat plants if that works for them. But I think that it's not reflective of the truth. It's not full picture. And I need to speak out against that. And so I am still creating meat-based recipes because I think people want to learn how to cook meat well, but also going into the science and trying to show a different story of plants versus meat.
Yeah, and thank you for doing that, by the way. I think the more people that do that, they impact more and more people. And I think incrementally we, if I look at even 5 years ago when I first started doing this diet, I mean, the number of people that have sort of changed their mind regarding that has been enormous, although we have a long way to go, no doubt, but it is growing. And I think it's, by the fact that all these people are having success and willing to share that with people. And many physicians have stood up and said, yeah, this seems to be the case. So I'm somewhat optimistic. Let me ask you, as far as, your own personal experience. Now, obviously, a lot of people, when they go on a carnivore or meat-based diet, and maybe less so now because it's becoming a little more known, but, a lot of people seeing the results. So like it's interesting. For an example, right now at my house, there are contractors that are working on, repairing some bathrooms and stuff like that. And one of the guys there says, hey, I've got a buddy that's on a carnivore diet, lost 80 pounds. And he just loves what you do, so on and so forth. And then he himself is like, I want to do this. And, and it's kind of just, you get this word of mouth groundswell, grassroots type of thing that's coming along. When you first did it though, and I don't remember exactly how long ago it was, how much pushback did you get from friends, family, work people, so on and so forth?
Well, so it's been a little bit over a year, carnivore specifically. Like I said, I did paleo and keto and stuff before. And what's fascinating that I'll add as a tidbit, when I switched over to carnivore, I already hadn't been eating sugar, gluten, all the things that people like, in the mainstream say are unhealthy. Literally the only thing I stopped eating was vegetables. So when people say, oh, vegetables are so healthy, or, oh, you're probably doing other things, I'm like, no, I wasn't eating sugar and all that stuff before. So I got involved in, some of those carnivore Facebook groups, the support groups. And the thing that people say is don't share it in the beginning, kind of keep it a secret. So I did in the beginning, especially since, like I said, I work in food and I didn't know if I was going to do this long term. So I didn't really want to advertise that I was doing that. I mean, it's the same thing when I did Whole30 4 years prior. I just started posting recipes that are a little bit more Whole30 friendly, but I didn't really advertise it as doing it until afterward. And I did share about it eventually. But yeah, I had to sort of do it on my own. And I think that's actually a wise thing. And I get why people say that, because people are going to be very concerned. I mean, even last night, I went out with some girlfriends, and one of them hadn't seen me in a while. I was like, wow, you've lost a lot of weight. What's going on? I was like, oh, yeah, I guess so. Like, I try to play it. I try to downplay it. But my other friend is like, it's all the meat. And she's asking me what I was doing. And she asked, what do you eat for breakfast? I said, oh, I don't really eat breakfast anymore. Like, I'm fat adapted. And she's, well, what do you do for lunch and dinner? And I said, I eat a steak. And then for dinner, I eat some burger patties. She's like, what's your vegetable? And it's like, I don't do veg. She's like, oh, she just, there's like literally a gasp. And people are concerned, like, that's so dangerous and all this stuff. And you don't really want to be dealing with that at the beginning. Now it's interesting, like kind of what I was talking about with the environmental piece. I have done so much research about all the science and evidence behind carnivore and plant. Like, I've just done so much knowledge myself over this past year plus that, like, if people come and criticize me, like, it truly doesn't matter, because I'm informed from the scientific side and from inside my body and my experience that this is the right way for me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing the sort of absolute rigid sort of religious fervor people have around the absolute, wonderfulness of all vegetables. And I take a very agnostic route. I say for some people it works fine, but I've seen many people like you. They were on meat plus nothing but no junk food at all, maybe just a little bit of vegetables, and they give it up and they get better for whatever reason. And maybe it's individual, but I think I have to wonder if, let's say nutrition science had never been invented back in, early 20th century, and there was no dietetics associations, what would the people find out for themselves if they were left to their own devices? And what you're saying, oh my God, I eat just meat and no vegetables here in the United States in 2021 sounds pretty crazy. But I mean, if you were to go to, I don't know, rural Mongolia, and southern Brazil, Argentina, the Nilotic African region, the polar regions, no one would bat an eye. They're like, that's normal. That's completely normal for us. And so we're in this, I mean, and what's even more funny now is, people can't fathom the idea of giving up processed food. It's just kind of like, how do you give up cakes and cookies, potato chips and those things? I mean, that's even worse. But I just wonder if humans were allowed to do their own experiment, just like animals are. I mean, this is what animals in the wild do. They don't have a nutritionist saying, you must eat, 5 fruits and vegetables a day. They just eat what's in the environment. They figure out what works best for them. And I wonder if humans were allowed that same freedom, and thankfully we still kind of have that to some degree, although those freedoms are quickly being eroded, I think, by what the food industry wants to feed us. So now you've been doing this for a year. So in the year, what have you discovered? Good, bad, indifferent? What's been the sort of experience so far?
Well, something I wanted to say, just based on what you just shared right now, I think that one of the most beautiful and powerful things about being able to test this for ourselves and our bodies is that, I mean, for every single food on earth, some people are going to say it's bad. Some people are going to say it's great. I mean, that's how it is for meat, but your body will actually tell you. And I think on that note, right before carnivore, I wasn't fully vegan, but I was almost there. I was stuffing myself with all the vegetables and salads, and I really believed it. And I didn't, in retrospect, I'm like, oh my gosh, no wonder, like, all the bleeding and gas, like, it was all the plants. I didn't know it at the time, but those ideas were so ingrained into my brain, and my body, my experience of carnivore forced me to believe. And I think that is what is so powerful about actually testing this for yourself is, no one really trumps your own experience, because, like, it's actually your body, like, you are the ultimate authority. And so I think that carnivore, like, for me over the past year, it's that tandem thing I think I sort of referred to earlier, but it's great to get the actual science and evidence for it and understand some of those things, but then also to pay attention to your body. And I think too, you touched on this a little bit right before I got going, but I think too, with the processed foods and even just eating this way, I mean, so many, like snacking wasn't a thing before the 1950s. And even something like a very meat heavy diet, like that is most of our history as humans. And so I think that it's easy to look and think, I mean, for example, in my life, I have never known anything but processed foods and Capri. Like that's what I grew up with. But you look historically, and it's like this actually is extremely new, especially when you consider the human body and our biology and how slow that evolution is. And even in my experience over the past year, there's been a lot of falling off the on and off the wagon, and I've gotten to a good place with it now, but I had to realize how absurd our food environment is. The fact that the processed foods, like nearly all the foods that we are surrounded by are engineered to be addictive, and our biology, the dopamine, our brain is incompatible with that. And realizing there's a reason why we can't control ourselves around certain foods. I am all for personal responsibility. I can't stand like victim mentality and all that stuff. But I think that this is the one thing where it's like people almost blame themselves with these foods, like, oh, I need to control myself. And it's like, well, maybe it's the food. And like there's sort of an involuntary positive response to these sugary, highly rewarding things. And so I've had to do a lot of work. It was like first the science, then confirming the health, then doing all the things to learn about dopamine and all that stuff to let go of the emotional attachments I had to food, which were unbelievably strong. Unbelievably strong.
Yeah, you're not alone in that. I mean, I think a lot of people, the food industry, engineers this stuff to be extremely, very palatable, very rewarding. And we're, I liken it to, let's just say heroin were illegal. And not only was it legal, but it was everywhere and it was super cheap. And your grandmother gave it to you, as a treat. We would be, we would think where we'd be. And it's a very similar analogy. And I think it's so incredibly different. And I think, one of the frustrations I have with the healthcare industry is that, we either completely are unaware of the impact that nutrition has on health, or we ignore it, or we accept it, but then we realize we're powerless to do anything about it because no one wants to change their habits. And so that may be, I think there's probably a lot of people in the latter category. We're like, well, I've tried to talk to my patient about losing weight and eating better and they never do. So screw that, I'm just going to start writing pills. And I think that's where many physicians find themselves at. And I think obviously that's a huge service to the population in general. I mean, I think as we're seeing, I just saw a projection that by 2030, fully 50% of Americans will be clinically obese, not just overweight, but actually obese. 50%, 1 in 2 people walking around will be obese, and pretty soon they will be in the majority, which is just it's really an amazing, scary, dreadful thought to think we'll be in that situation. And, in many cases that comes with chronic disease, not always, but in most cases, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, cancer, on and on and on. The risk factors are well established. And so you have an entire generation of people, including young kids, that, they never, ever even experience a day of health in their entire life, or what I would consider true human experience. And so we're being conditioned to that. Hopefully, whatever your belief is about diet, but there has to be some realization that we've got to turn this thing around. And I think, communities like this and what you're doing, and there's many others out there, are, the only ones that seem to have an interest in this. I don't know I can see study after study after study that supports and shows there's a lot of information that supports what we're talking about. And it tends to be disregarded to support the narrative of, this continue to eat your junk food, we'll give you your pills and medicate you ad infinitum until I don't know what the end game is there. Somebody makes a lot of profit and everybody else's misery, I think. Okay. So since you've been doing this and you've been public, can you relay anybody that you've convinced to do this or helped with this, or what's been your experience with that stuff with other folks?
Well, I've been very shocked by this, but I've had vegans reach out to me and said that my podcast turned them and that it prompted them to look into some of the beliefs that they had adopted from various documentaries and things that they had watched. And they discovered that a lot of those things were actually not true. And that's actually, I said earlier that the podcast is great for seasoned carnivores, but also sort of addresses the skeptics, and that there's been a lot of people who've said like, wow, this sounds completely insane. But then they're like, wait, this sort of makes sense. And then they start trying it, shifting one meal a day to carnivore, then two. And wow, like my gas is gone. My IBS symptoms have lessened, or various things. This is relatively new for me. I basically came out with it in April. So I'm just getting started, but I've been kind of partnering up, not in an official capacity, but Certified Angus Beef took me out to a ranch in Kansas in June, and I got to learn about how beef is raised and about some of the environmental pieces. There's another ranch I'm visiting in November. I'm just trying to find my support people, and you guys are all included in that, and just try to make change. And I guess, I'm sort of careful to not necessarily be really pushy about it. I think sometimes people are overly pushy in food, or shamey, or judgy, or I'm very careful not to do that. But I think it's what I said earlier, presenting a fuller picture. It's like, let's actually look at some of these other things that you've probably never heard. Even the whole history, I just did 2 episodes about the history of fat, and where those narratives came from. And that just unbelievable story that it was just an untested, unproven hypothesis that got adopted by the government without proving it's actually safe, or like, it's just mind blowing. It's like, wait, where do all these things come from? And most people, I think that's one of the biggest, I wouldn't say regrets of my life, but just one of the weirdest epiphanies, like, wow, I had so many of these ideas around food ingrained. I didn't actually ask where they came from. Like, I just assumed it was true. And then looking in, like, whoa, this came from nonsense. Like, this isn't scientifically sound. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd mentioned, you have a lot of vegans reaching out to you, and believe it or not, many of the people in this community are former plant-based vegetarians, vegans. We have a whole bunch of them that, they, for whatever reason, it didn't work for them, and they ended up with some significant health issues, and they've been able to turn that around, going meat-based. What, because you said you fell down that kind of plant-based rabbit hole for a while, more or less. What compelled you to do that? I mean, what were the compelling arguments that convinced you? Talking to you seemed like an intelligent, rational person. What was it that convinced you to go that way? And then where do you see the flaws in some of those arguments now?
Well, I think part of it, I think the food industry was shifting that way. I mean, I did a lot of spokesperson work and brand ambassadorships, and a lot of, I didn't do these personally, but people reached out, like, that are on like the, I think it's called pulses. They're like the chickpeas and lentils and stuff. A lot of these food boards for these products are trying to push and advertise. And if you think about like the whole culture of like the superfood, like trend thing, like a lot of that is just marketing. But so I think I just sort of fell to it because it's what I heard constantly, and not questioning or it even occurring to me that maybe there's money behind this and there's a motive. And of course there is by nature to some degree, but I think sometimes it gets out of control. And I think one of the biggest takeaways that I've had from carnivore in general is that the default for anything is to approach it with skepticism. There are just so many false things that I'd adopted because it's what people says, but then you look at, like I said, the science behind it, and now my personal experience, it's like, this, what on earth? Like this actually doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And I think it's for everyone to figure out themselves. Like, I really try not to, I mean, if someone says they're vegan, it's working great for them, perfect. I just know that for me, I kept going further down that route. Things are getting worse and worse. Now I think it's because all of the fiber and the oxalates and things in the plants. And this, I mean, I've been free of all those things. It's all in remission so long as I stick this way. And when I veer off, ooh, my body speaks. It speaks loud and clear.
Yeah, that is, I guess, a nice thing about this. You kind of get really in tune with what's going on with different food. As you mentioned, you know, everything you hear in the media seems to be pushing you to eat more plants, eat less meats. I mean, we're seeing, you know, it's the belief that it's healthier, it's better for the environment, on and on and on. And, you know, when you really look behind the scenes and really look at the data, there's not a lot of evidence that supports that, quite honestly. Particularly, I mean, what we're seeing is if you don't eat junk food, yes, your health will improve. Now, the funny thing is when we look at the advertising, most of the advertising dollars, I think, in the US are spent around, you know, some of this processed food and pharmaceutical. I haven't watched sort of network TV in years, but every time I'm in a hotel room and it's on, I mean, I'm just amazed by the number of pharmaceutical ads that are, I mean, they're just everywhere. They're constantly, they're nonstop. It's like every commercial break is a drug company ad. And so you know, when you realize they're paying for the advertising, then the TV shows or the news shows that run those ads can't really go against them. And so it's just no wonder the narrative is what it is. And so,
yeah. And I want to add something, you know, I think that getting off of processed foods is a great move for a lot of people. And that was sort of my first step. But even sometimes people are like, oh, you know, carnivore is extreme, like just to eat real food. I cooked every single one of my meals from scratch for 11 years. And for the 4 years prior to carnivore, like I had eliminated sugar, gluten, like grains altogether, and a slew of other things. I was eating everything from scratch. Like that still wasn't enough for me. It was specifically plants for me. And that's not just, I mean, who knows? I do believe that people's bodies, there is a variation in sensitivities, and maybe my body is more sensitive than others. But I think that even there are different like steps, right? I mean, even when I first did the Whole30, it was huge for me because I came from standard American diet, but then eventually I was still having issues. But I think, I mean, it's, I think everyone sort of agrees that processed foods are not good. Maybe cooking from scratch will help for a while. It certainly improved my health, but to get to this place of health that I honestly never could have imagined, it's just meat for me. I'm not even eating dairy because I don't tolerate that currently. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly see that. I mean, currently I kind of fluctuate back and forth between meat and then meat, some dairy, eggs, and, you know, and stuff like that. And when I go just to straight meat, I always seem to feel the best. I mean, I think there's a true physiologic reason for that. And it's very interesting. Many other people find that. But how do you, so let's talk about, you know, some people will look at a meat-based diet and say, oh my God, that's so boring. There's no, you know, I would get bored, but I mean, in the reality is there are literally thousands of different ways you can prepare meats and different preparations and different cuts and different animal sources. Let's talk a little bit about how, I mean, as a recipe person, I mean, are you just ground beef and water every day, or do you branch out a little bit and have some fun? Not that ground beef isn't fun, but.
So I love this question because this is part of why I love to tell people about my background, because I was creating kind of those outrageous foods, like all the textures, all the flavors, really understanding the palate and balancing those things. And I eat mostly beef and salt. I do eat eggs and seafood and other things. And occasionally I'll do seasoning with meat, but most of the time it's just like grill, like smoke meat and salt is amazing. And I never expected that for myself. I think that's something that people say about carnivore, like just as a general thing that happens is that over time you care less about variation. I was like, well, that's not going to happen to me because I've always left. No, it's happened to me. And I think part of that has been illuminated kind of in hindsight as I've learned more about dopamine. But when you eat something hyper-stimulating, it actually makes it so that it's more difficult to enjoy simpler foods. And it's the same, there's all that stuff about dopamine fasting in general coming out of Silicon Valley. I was like, what? Like, what is that? That's ridiculous. But I read about the idea that when you have these very kind of outrageous experiences, it makes it more difficult to enjoy the regular day to day. And I found that applies to food as well. And it's interesting. I'm still sort of exploring that, but there were times like even like for a holiday, let's say like Christmas, where I think, well, like, I'm going to provide dessert for my family, some sort of special dessert for Christmas. And maybe I should enjoy it and eat it with them because it's Christmas. I don't want to, but then I noticed for a few days after that I'm kind of grumpy, and the meat, it's like, well, wow, this meat kind of sucks compared to like this really stimulating thing. And so I think that most people, I was as well, that when you become accustomed to meat, it's actually dang good and satisfying. I don't know how many hundreds of just steaks I've eaten grilled with salt, and it never gets old. And there's something primal about that, and I'm thankful for that. Because I've been dieting since I was in 7th grade, struggling with my weight, all sorts of things, and oh my gosh, how many things I've scarfed down that are just so disgusting. But it's like meat is it's so human, it's so primal, it's so satisfying. You just have to learn about the nature of foods, and kind of keep your dopamine in range, and understand that if you veer from that, like, that's fine. Food freedom is a huge thing that I had to work through, and kind of a sense of rebelliousness and, oh, I can't eat that or whatever. But if you really stick with these foods, you'll find that it's so good. It's so satisfying. It really is.
Yeah, I echo that. You mentioned smoke. I had a smoked chuck steak for breakfast. About 3.75 pounds was my breakfast. Probably my only food for the day. But that's good. I'll get me through the day. Objectively, with regard to your health, and I know you said you've been dieting. One of the things we see about the sort of the war on obesity, which we're clearly losing, but this thought about how many calories you're eating, how many calories you're expending. That's an incontrovertible fact, supposedly. But they don't really address, well, some people do, but the message of satiety gets lost in that. I think in many cases, it's like, there's a way to do this, it's easy, and there's a way to do it's very hard and painful. And, like me, I'll do it the easy way. And I think that you're probably at satiety. Did you find a difference? Because one of the things, I wonder what your satiety is like, now, because one of the benefits, the purported benefits of vegetables are, they're high in fiber, they're high in bulk, they're low in calories, and so they can have a satiating. If you eat 6 cups of broccoli, you're going to be kind of full. Your guts may hurt. You may be, bloated and not feeling very good, not want to eat anymore. But what has been the difference with you with satiety, or is that something you've noticed a difference with, going from healthy food, meat plus vegetables, versus just eliminating the vegetables? And how many vegetables were you eating before? Was it like, I remember when I was on a ketogenic diet, Mark Sisson, his salad the size of your head, and I was doing that. I was eating these massive
Big ass salad.
spinach salads. Right. And I was hating every bit of the spinach. I like the eggs and the bacon and a little bit of the raspberries and walnuts and the dressing I put on there. But the spinach itself was just, I was like, gosh, this would be, just eating a plate of raw spinach by itself is not something I would consider very palatable. But let me ask you, did you notice a difference in satiety, or what was the difference between meat and plus vegetables?
Holy moly, that has been one of my favorite discoveries, is the whole concept of satiety, and even just learning that that sense of fullness, that satisfied fullness, but not bloatedness, is from fat and protein detected in the gut. Because I think people can confuse that with like fullness, like your belly is stuffed, which tends to come from carbs. And one of the things that's so fun, like even when I went to the certified Angus beef dinner, is like I put away like a 24-ounce ribeye, and people are like, where'd you put that? Like no one came close to finishing it. And then I can just go and like run around or do whatever after. And it's so noticeable that when I just eat meat, I'm fine. The digestion is fine. I can go to the garage. I can lift weights, right after, or go for a brisk walk, or it's like a fullness, but it's not a heaviness, I've noticed. Whereas, oh my gosh, I had horrible bloating from the vegetables. The fiber was just wrecking my gut from the inside. I had problems, like I said, with the compounds in there. The gum bleeding that I was experiencing, I was so type A about my hygiene, using the medicated mouthwashes and doing gum scalings, brushing twice a day, flossing. I talk about this in my podcast, but like nothing ever worked until I got rid of the plants, little things like that. But I think that there's the satiety, but also the fat adaptedness. I'm sure that the fasting is so popular, and I had tried that a while back, and it went horribly for me. I lost my menstruation, and I was dizzy, and it didn't make sense. And now it just sort of happens on its own because I've got the fat in my body on tap, and I'm just sort of satiated from these meals. So I think that's sort of another thing that I've discovered naturally that I had tried before. And of course it didn't work because I was eating carbs too. So yeah, it's been beautiful to discover both of those things really through carnivore. And there's just no reason to be eating vegetables unless you like them. And part of what I prided myself in my recipe development is I came up with some really creative, delicious ways to enjoy some, frankly, pretty bitter and gross vegetables that I trained myself to like. But my opinion is there's no nutritional reason to be eating them. I mean, I was anemic for my whole life up until I became carnivore, and I really think it's because a lot of the anti-nutrients are probably blocking like the absorption by binding to like the iron and calcium and things.
Yeah, not to mention the fact that the non-heme iron is just not as bioavailable to start with. And anemia, particularly in women, is an extremely, extremely common deficiency. In fact, iron deficiency anemia, I think, is the #1 deficiency worldwide, nutritional deficiency, and it probably has to do a lot with the fact that we're under eating meat, quite honestly.
Yeah.
When you, when you said you were anemic, were there any other objective clinical markers that you had issues with that have changed or gotten better or worse since you've been doing this?
I got my blood work done recently. I think here's the thing about the blood work. My blood work before was fairly normal. The iron was kind of always the big thing, but as I'm sure you've talked about before, like the whole normal ranges aren't really that good of a guide because technically I was normal in a lot of things, but I was experiencing a lot of problems. I mean, even one of them that I haven't talked about yet today is I was diagnosed with PCOS pretty young when I was 17. And that's another thing from carnivore. I have regular cycles for the first time in my life. They're far less painful. Oh my gosh, I used to be bedridden when my menstruation would start. Before is awful, just really painful, inflammation and back pain and all sorts of things happening for like the first 2 days, kind of every time. Oh gosh, yeah, most of it though for me was gut related, and that's kind of been my most passionate topic. I just did an episode on gut health, and the thing that strikes me the most about that whole topic is I see this probiotic industry just exploding, and I cannot tell you how many thousands of dollars I spent on probiotics thinking it was the answer. And I started learning about how probiotics do not actually populate your gut. And there's a lot of scientific evidence where, like, for example, after taking an antibiotic, taking probiotics actually delays the restoration of gut bacteria. So there's plenty of evidence against probiotics. And what I found is that none of those things actually help my gut problems. And when you think about it, like, root cause point of view, of course it worked that, like, taking away the plants causing those problems would work. Like, why would adding bacteria pills that don't actually populate your gut do anything? But so, yeah, there's just so much stuff there in my experiences where I've been trying to figure this out for years. And then now that I'm on the other side, it's like, oh, okay, like that sort of makes sense why why that wasn't working and why this works so much better and I'm free of these problems. Like, take away the foods that are causing the problems.
Yeah, it's kind of because I mean, often the solution is buy this, 1999 bottle of supplements or whatever is $59 for a bottle of supplement pills that are designed to, most of the time, obviously they don't work very well, but cost wise, a lot of people are concerned, about, the meat-based diet is just, you can't overcome the cost of that. Do you find that based on what you're eating before with all the different variety, is there a significant cost difference that you can tell?
Oh my word. My grocery bills are less expensive. Seriously. It because people don't realize, like, it costs like $3 for like this half an ounce package of this herb. And like, it's, I don't know, $8 a pound for like berries, or which actually I don't personally eat berries. I don't think they're bad food though, for most people, but various plant foods are actually pretty expensive. And the thing is, carnivore absolutely can be expensive. You can buy lobster tails and filet mignon and all that stuff, but goodness, I mean, even the $5 a pound ground beef, like the 80/20 beef, that's like one of my, like, I usually eat that at least once a day. That's not expensive. I mean, the general rule of thumb for, it sounds like you're eating a lot more, which makes sense, but the general rule of thumb for carnivores, that you need about a pound and a half of meat per day. Like, that's $10 of beef. And I think people don't realize how much they're spending on processed foods and how expensive those things are. Another thing too is that I used to eat out a lot more. It was when I said food was my life, I mean, so much of my entertainment, date nights, girls' nights, is like, let's check out this bakery, let's go out to this restaurant. I don't really do that anymore because, frankly, no one can cook steak better than I can. And it's like $70 instead of, 15. There's just not as much reason to go out. And so that's an enormous savings. I mean, I think every person I've called on that statement, I've had families say stuff like that. I'm like, well, you're spending about $5-6 a day on this coffee, $5-6 a day on like soda. Like, people don't realize how much they're spending on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I echo your point about going to a restaurant, just because, I mean, for me to eat and get full, I mean, it's cost prohibitive. I mean, if I'm going to eat steak and I can do it at home for 20% of the cost, sometimes even less than that, depending on where you go. And I mean, with the exception might be like a Brazilian churrascaria where it's kind of an all you can eat deal. And I can kind of, you got to kind of make it an even proposition for me. But I think, many of us, we go to the restaurant not because of I mean, I guess with regard to steak, not because of the food. It's more just to socialize and spend time with friends. And I find it more often than not, I'm just having people over to the house and cooking for them, and it's more fun for me to cook for them and to have the people, because at the restaurant you're basically going to be interacting with who's ever at your table for the most part. But at home you can pick who comes, and you kind of maybe a better experience, and you can do whatever you want, type of thing. You can pick the music, you can pick the people, you can pick the food. You don't have to worry about it. It was just a lot cheaper. So absolutely, I think that's a benefit there. What about when were you using a lot of supplements and stuff like that previously with these other diets?
Yeah, I mean, my most common supplement, I've had two children, so there were long periods during nursing and pregnancy where I was taking prenatals. There's been a lot of iron supplementation, obviously, with the anemia. And then I guess with carnivore, I was sort of undecided at first about the organ supplements. I took them for a little bit, but then I've honestly let those go. I'm looking a little bit more at that. I'm not really convinced that that is necessary. I've taken a little bit in the past, but not a ton, and I don't supplement anything at this point.
So you mentioned you'd eaten 24-ounce steak in one sitting, which I certainly applaud you for that. And a lot of women can't do that, but I mean, that's to me, it's like, it's not that much. When I look at it, it's pound and a half. I'm like, that's a snack for me. But how much do you find do you need to eat a day? I mean, is it just do you sit there and say, today I'm going to eat this amount, or you just kind of how hungry I am? And that's what most people end up doing. But how much what would you estimate you eat typically in a week? Typically, what's a week look like for you?
Yeah, I would say most often I don't eat breakfast. I eat a steak for lunch and I eat burger patties for dinner. So it's a pretty condensed eating window, probably between like 12 and 6. But at the same time, I mean, when I first was transitioning to carnivore, I needed to eat more frequently. I needed to eat like bacon and kind of work with the cravings a little bit. Now I feel like, I don't really get cravings as much anymore, but when there was sort of like first deal with cravings with bacon, then deal with cravings like working through the brain. And now they're sort of disappeared because I've worked on weakening those. But I've always felt from the beginning, let me just eat when I'm hungry. Even there were times in the beginning where I ate even when I was not hungry, but felt like I just needed to chew on something. That was really just the beginning. But I think that's one of the great things about carnivore is that you don't need to do that. Even though I've settled into this, occasionally I'll have like eggs and bacon, but I actually find I feel like this is sacrilege to say this. Bacon isn't really doing it for me anymore. So I've even sort of let go of that, which is kind of mind blowing. But yeah, it's pretty minimal, just mostly beef at this point. Oh, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I muted myself. Sorry. Do you find that? What about? Do you have a preference for how it's done? Well rare, medium rare? Has that changed? I find a lot. It's kind of interesting. My better half was a vegetarian when I met her, and she is now 90% carnivore, but she still can't get past the well done stage. It's sort of, so I don't know. Are you somebody who's like a raw meat, bloody meat person, or where do you like it at this point?
I like medium rare. I do love steak tartare. I usually get that at restaurants though. I've never actually done that myself because it's too much knife work. I feel like medium rare is probably where I've settled, but I'll eat a blue steak if it comes up. I don't mind. It's all delicious. I like the grill and the smoker though. I have 3 grills. Smoke tastes good. Fire tastes good. It's also in our history.
Yeah, I've been, like I said, I've been smoking a lot since we just moved up out of here. And by what part of the country? And I forgot to ask you that. Where are you at right now?
I'm in the Orlando area. Yeah, so Florida.
Okay, so we've got several Floridians in the group. I know. What are your plans for the coming, near future? Do you have any specific goals or aims? Or I know you have a podcast, and tell us a little bit about your podcast if you don't mind.
Yeah, so the podcast, like I said, it's not interview style. They're meant to be short, digestible episodes that are very highly researched, sort of an aggregation of the most compelling research for carnivore relating to various things. I have 13 episodes up right now that sort of put down the groundwork for why carnivore is so compelling. And I'm plan to start getting more into how do you handle the emotional attachments to food? How do you start letting go of that? And I have an Instagram account as well that's sort of an extension of the podcast, of things that don't fit into there. I'm still posting meat recipes on my blog, my food blog, but really all I wanted to do, and like I said, when I was so scared even to start doing this, I just want to put a different message out there. I'm sure you felt the same. Just offer something different and try to support people in doing this. And as you probably can guess from my history, I have so much compassion and understanding for falling off the wagon and just how hard it can be to actively, freely choose not to eat the foods that we're surrounded by. And that's something I really had to work through. Maybe I'll touch on in the last few minutes. I had a lot of rebelliousness with food. I find that a lot of people have that as well. Not really feeling like they have to eat a certain way or have to get their health under control. Or I think a lot of that comes from diet mentality. I also had a little bit of that from my childhood. I think there's little things that can happen that can influence that. Like when I was a kid, I had a weight problem. There were certain, and my parents meant well, they were like, I don't want to disparage them, but there were foods that my brothers were allowed to eat that I wasn't because they're less healthy. I sort of developed this relationship with food that was rebellious. And there was one time I was in the garage and I thought the coast was clear. I started eating ice cream with my fingers and my dad caught me. Like I thought, oh, I'm not allowed to do that. And then with diets too, kind of on and off the wagon, like, oh, I shouldn't be eating this. And just a lot of like, just nonsense in my head. It's like, I had to really work through that and realize I can eat pizza and ice cream and cookies all day long for the rest of my life. There's no one saying I can or can't do that. I can participate in all the things like dessert parties here. I can do all of that. I don't want to. And that was something that was really helpful for me. And I love working with people on because people don't realize how these things can be really subconscious and playing. I mean, how often do you hear someone, at a party like, oh, do you want some cookie? No, I can't. I'm on a diet. Instead of like, no, thank you. I'm trying out this diet. I want to see if this, will work for me or whatever. I think there's a lot of work to be done on that. So I'm really passionate on trying to shift that for people as well. The mental baggage, drop that mental baggage.
Yeah, and I think it's like I don't want the cookie, but I sure as heck would like some of that filet over there, or something like that, or whatever, whatever at the party. But we see this, this reward. Oh, you deserve that chocolate bar. You deserve that extra glass of wine because life is tough and you deserve it, and that's the message we get. And it is funny, as a kid, if you had responsible parents, they probably tell you, no, you don't need to be eating junk all the time. Eat some decent food. And then you get out of the house and you're an adult on your own, and you're unsupervised. And many people just go, like you said, they eat nothing but ice cream every day, cookies every day, pizza every day, and some people never get out of that, and they can't figure it out. But it is a challenging battle, and I think that's one of the when people come to me for whatever their issue is, whether it's weight loss, whether it's some sort of autoimmune disease, my first thing is, look, we've got to, overcome these reasons for eating this garbage, whether it's food addiction or changing your relationship with the food. That's something I've been sort of advocating from the very beginning. I mean, it's easy just to write down on a piece of paper, you need to do this, but it's a much different task to get people to actually do that. And one of the big impediments is this, this sort of food addiction that we have. What is the name of your podcast?
So the podcast is The Road to Carnivore. May I add one more thing on what you just said?
Absolutely.
Okay. Something that, I think there's so much marketing around, like Snickers, if you're hangry, like fix it with the Snickers bar. We are told that, recognizing that. And I think that one of the most powerful things I've ever trained myself to do is to look at every food as the package deal and ask, how will I feel after eating this? I think even a lot of people do that with kind of the quote unquote bad foods, but even in the beginning, I'd look at the steak and think, how will I feel after I've eaten this? I'm going to feel satiated. I'm not going to feel bloated, and just trying to reinforce it on both sides. So yeah, I think that's another helpful strategy that's worked for me. So yeah, my podcast is The Road to Carnivore. It's on pretty much all the platforms, and that's my website and Instagram handle as well.
Okay, I'll have to look that up. Now, unfortunately, we've come through an hour. It just flew right by. So Instagram, The Road to Carnivore, podcast, The Road to Carnivore, the website, Road to Carnivore. Do you have anything coming up in the near future that you'd like to share with people before we go?
Not really. I've got some personal stuff going on. I'm going to get out to another ranch that I'm a fan of in November, December. And I'm just trying to keep working on the podcast episodes and trying to help people work through this and transition to carnivore long term.
Which ranch are you heading to, out of curiosity?
It's Adams Beef Ranch. It's in Florida. They have land in 4 different counties. They're a pretty big ranch, but their beef is unreal. It's so good. I could just weep. So I'm just like a fangirl of them, and they invited me down, and I just can't wait to visit them, because I don't know, it's probably a little nerdy, but I love seeing the pasture and learning more about all this. My husband secretly, well, not so secretly, kind of wants to start raising cattle as well. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I don't know if we can do that life, but I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah, I was just on a ranch yesterday in North Carolina, so it was kind of interesting, Summerfield Farms. And it was, again, the thing I have found is, these are some of the most caring, wonderful people that you could ever find. And the argument that the plant-based people are, these farmers are cruel and awful, and there's nothing farther from the truth when you actually go out there and visit the ranches and farm. And it was kind of funny. They were calving. One of the calves had gotten outside the fence, so he went out there and had to walk out there and shuttle the calf back in, and just kind of taking care of them. And it was just a really neat experience. But good for you, and continued success on what you're doing, and stop by anytime in the community. And I hope that more people like you listen to you and share the message, and hopefully we'll be inspired to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks once again. For everybody else, we'll be back tomorrow, and you guys have a great day. I got to go to another meeting, guys. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye now.
Take care.
Join Revero.health for a 30-day free trial to get access to live Q&A with VIP guests, social community meetings, member discounts, low-carb healthcare providers list, forum, workouts, monthly challenges, early access to podcasts, recipes, carnivore diet guide, fasting guide, shred guide, and much more.